Hey guys, so I'm going to start reading this book. I'm going to try to solve this. Yes, I'm going to try to solve this and we shall see. So far I'm, how far am I into this book? I am page 18 and not much is happening. So it's a Poirot story, which I absolutely love. He's iconic and I think he's amazing. Anyways, it's a story about him and he's solving this murder. It's a third girl. So there's 3 girls and one of them just walked into his office right now. There's no name. She basically says she committed a murder, but she's not sure. And then she proceeds to say that he's too old and rushes out of the door. Following day, he gets a phone call and I'm in that conversation right now. Not much has been said. I'm following the characters that are being introduced at this time and I will give you an update soon. Today I'm going to have a full day of reading. So I'm just gonna read, see how much I can get done, trying to solve this mystery. I'm so excited. Okay, so I just got home from church last night. I tried to read some more of this book here. And I don't recommend reading at night when you're really tired. So I tried to look online to see if there's an audio version of this book just because I'm thinking that I would do much better with an audio book version. I'm on page 45 right now. It's chapter 4 and I am finding the writing style a little bit disconjointed. It's a bit older, right? So it's a little bit different. The style of her writing is a little bit more harder to follow. Oliver, she is seeming to be a key player in describing who is involved currently. So she's given just basically a background of all of the family dynamics and she's kind of a key player. I need to write all these down now because I read it really late, so I'm really tired. Miss Oliver, she's a detective author and I feel like this was Agatha Christie kind of saying something because in her description of one of her stories, there's this detective that she detests and she hates. And she gives him Sven, something is the name. But I'm thinking it's Agatha Christie and talking about Hercule Poirot. And I think it's actually quite hilarious, the play on stuff here. I'm enjoying it. It's just a little bit harder for me to read as a reader. I have to write down all the notes and write down all the characters and kind of reread a little bit of this just to make sure I understand all the players said by Miss Oliver until we get to know them, because I feel like she is a huge player in this, so we shall see. That's my update. I am, let me see how many pages I'm currently at. Currently, I am at 91 pages so far, and I wanted just to check in because a lot of times in the first beginning stages of a book, you're going to find that there's a lot of setup and key information that you learn is really important later on. So that's my thoughts on this so far. I'm just gonna look at some of the stuff I've found out, go over it with you guys and go from there. See how this all plays out. I'm still very suspicious of Mrs. Oliver. Now, I've not read a lot of the books. This is my first Agatha Christie book that I'm actually reading. I've watched movies, but I've never read her works before. So this is the first one. So I don't know if Mrs. Oliver plays a huge important part in Poirot's mysteries and solving them, but she's very suspicious to me. I actually really appreciate in Agatha's writing is that she has she sprinkles information on. So my notes are kind of crazy because she literally gives us this little information, then I've got to add on to it later on and keep adding on and keep adding on. Now she did info dump in a conversation between Miss Oliver and another family member, Naomi, I believe her name is. During that conversation, we only hear her side of things and it's quite the info dump and I wrote down a lot of notes from that. It's interesting to see. I'm kind of loving the fact that I'm trying to solve this. This is actually really fun. I found this idea through Chantel's YouTube channel. I will link hers in the description box below and you can see it. The ones that I've watched movies for, I definitely watch her solve these. They're so fun to watch her try to solve them. We have Mrs. Oliver. She's a detective story writer and part of the Detective Authors Club. She knows a lot about the family like I discussed before. And one thing I thought was really interesting about her is that Poirot noted that she had acquired some wealth since the last time she had seen her, which I think is quite interesting because one of the family members that we're going to look into is very wealthy. And that's something to keep an eye on. So I'm going to do that. Mrs. Oliver went with the Lorimers, who are highly gossipers, and had drinks at the Restrick's house. And this is the family with the potential murder that we're looking into. There has not been a murder yet. It's all just been hearsay that Poirot's following up on in case there really was a murder. And he's trying to investigate to see what is happening with this family to make someone think that there's actually a murder. Mr. and Mrs. Restrick are a second marriage couple, and the girl, the wife, is quite a beautiful girl. Her and the daughter, who was the one that came to Poirot originally saying that there was a murder that she may have committed and now has gone missing, is the stepdaughter to this woman and Mr. Restrick, the biological daughter of Mr. Restrick. They have a conflicting relationship, which gives motive, obviously. That's part of what the setup is here, to play on the motive. So we'll watch that. The daughter's name is Norma Restrick, and she doesn't live at home and she has a boyfriend, which is going to play an important role in the next little bit here. So keep that in mind. See what I mean? Like, I get that information and then things get layered on top, of course, which is a great writing technique. So you have to continue going back and following up with things. Then in this household, there is the uncle, and his name is Sir Roderick Horsfield. The uncle is deaf, distinguished admiral or an astronomer. He has a telescope off his roof, which also I think may play importance later in the story, so we shall see, because that obviously that being said is something of importance. You know, you don't just say, oh, and he has a telescope on top of his roof for no reason, especially as a writer. Foreshadow using these things. So, and he has a secretary slash woman of interest. She is of Asian or foreign descent, and her name is Sonia. She's pretty and goes after the uncle in London, or to London. So later on, we learn about the girls in the flat, the other two girls. Now, the reason why this book is called The Third Girl is because at this time in history, and it's actually still to this day, a lot of people, including myself, you get together with people of your age, you rent together, and I have some stories about that. So this really made a lot of sense to me, some of it. But I guess in London, there's a titling of these girls. So the first girl will rent the flat. She gets the best room. She pays a bit more. The second girl doesn't get as good of a pick and she pays less. And then the third girl, to help cover offset of the place, will get the worst pick of the house, probably a hole in the wall kind of thing. The first girl, Claudia Reese Holland, who is quite interesting in certain situations that have happened so far in the first 90 pages or so. She's a very strong character, very political in a sense. She's very highly in tune to politics and how the impression of her is looked upon other people. And it makes sense because she's the MP's daughter. That makes sense to her character. But she does display a few questioning things. So something to watch out for. But Frances Carey, an artsy type of girl. She works in the art gallery. And then of course Norma, the third girl, who is working in interior decorator in London. Frances Carey, basically there was a conversation, this last few pages that I read, there was a conversation between Claudia and Frances, and Claudia was concerned about Norma. She hadn't heard back from her. And Frances was like, why do you even care? She had no emotional connection to Norma, which is concerning for types that are able to commit murder. They don't have an emotional connection. They're usually psychopathic, and these kinds of things play out. So it's something to watch about her. So I'm going to keep my eye on her as well. Then there's Andrew Restorick. There's a lot of drama that's happening with Andrew, but Andrew has come out to say he hates Norma's boyfriend. Mary Restorick is the second wife to Andrew and the stepmother to Norma, and they don't get along, like I said. In that conversation where I said there was a lot of info dumping with Mrs. Oliver to the first family, the Lorimers, Mary was being poisoned, that there was a gastric issue. She ended up in the hospital, a possible death attempt, or what looked like death attempt. So Mary actually loves being in the garden and working, and I guess they're saying that it was weed killer that she may have ingested. So it could be a possible attempted murder. It could be that she just doesn't love her life. She seems a very sullen, very disturbed, unhappy woman, even though she's very beautiful and has a lot of potential. So we'll see, we'll watch that and see how that turns out in the next, we just need a few more details to kind of solidify my thoughts on her. Then we have the boyfriend, David Baker, which I also found really interesting, and these things I really connect to as a writer. So in the conversation that Mrs. Oliver, see here, I still suspect Mrs. Oliver right from the get-go right now. She was pretending to elicit information for Poirot and pretending all these things, and in the middle of the conversation, Poirot tries to get her attention. And so she says, sorry, just one second, it's the baker. And Poirot, she goes to Poirot and is like, what do you want? He's like,
the baker? You made me the baker?
And he made a bit of a deal about it. And she's like, oh, well, you put me on the spot, la la la. And she just tried to wave it off. But I find that very interesting because I think she knows a lot more than she's saying. I think she knows quite a lot of what's going on, because that's the first word that came to her mind too. And when people are caught off guard, they usually will expose something of themselves or the situation or something that they know unintentionally, subconsciously. So I find it really interesting that the boyfriend is David Baker, and that's his name. He is Norma's boyfriend. She's currently missing right now. Poirot goes to the Restoric's house for a little visit, pretends to know Roderick, has a conversation with him, gets introduced to Sonia, gets introduced to the house, but also kind of snoops. He also talks to Mary, finds out she's quite snappy when it comes to Norma and the hatred that Norma has for her. She's willing to speak to Poirot about it, but it's very interesting because Poirot kind of starts searching around and he finds what he believes to be Norma's room. Searches that out a little bit, and then they have an encounter with David coming down the stairs unannounced. Mary Restorick was like, what are you doing in my house? I didn't even know you were here. You didn't ring the front door. So he snuck into the house. It just shows the character of David, that he has no sense of respect for Mary or Andrew and their home. And whether he was taking something to bring to Norma if she's still alive, or trying to cover up something and hide something or get something that might incriminate him later, he was in the house unannounced, totally disrespectful. And when Mary addressed him, he was very arrogant about it and just nonchalant and did not care that he took it in an air of pride and arrogance. So his character is quite interesting as well. Very like narcissistic and the very like opulent sort of style. Like there's different types of narcissistic people, but he's definitely that kind of like wants the attention sort of person. And so it's really interesting. A lot of key players in this so far. I will keep you updated as I'm reading it. I can't wait to see if I'm right on certain things. I'm starting to develop some ideas. We're almost 100 pages in, so that's usually where you get hooked and you find out kind of where the story is going. So really excited. We'll see. I'll update you in the next one. Okay, a lot is going on right now. I just finished making supper and I'm waiting for the last little bit to cook, and so I came upstairs for some quiet reading time. And the last little bit has been crazy. I wanted to give you an update before I continued reading. So currently I'm on page 170. I don't know where I left off with talking to you guys. David, the boyfriend, David Baker, was at the flat and a knife was used in a stabbing that Norma was framed for, and it was missing. It's gone missing, and it was found by Frances originally, and she mentioned it to Claudia, which I find interesting because if something happened that later. That was something I'm keeping an eye on as well. Page 107, rethinking the idea is what I wrote down. Rethinking the idea of Mrs. Oliver as she's following Claudia and then ends up following David. So Claudia ends up going to work. She works again for Andrew Restrick. And I'm just gonna move this over. And so, so she follows her. And then she ends up following David. Miss Oliver spots Norma and David in a cafe. And so she takes out her coils and she disguises herself and goes sits beside them and listens in on their conversation, which was enlightening because Norma's alive. So there was a murder that she thought she did, but she's alive and she's kind of in hiding. Norma mentions that weed killer may have been planted in the drawer of Norma's room, making her think she had done it. Norma also alludes to the fact the knife was planted in her drawer at the flat. And here's where I find it really interesting. David Baker, the boyfriend, who's with her at the cafe, if he was the one who took the knife from the flat, he blatantly just lied to her because he was pretending like he didn't know anything about the knife and made her think he didn't know about it. So that's really interesting. So I think he knows, but he just lied to her. And my battery's gonna die. She's asking all these questions, and then all of a sudden he's like, well, I'll just marry you. Let's get married. And then, you know, you would be my wife, and they couldn't do anything because she's afraid they'll put her in a loony bin. So then, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and it was kind of after they were talking about money. And it makes you think, oh, is he in it for the money? Because she's quite well off. Perhaps she's drugged by the way she's responding and talking. She seems very much like she's on something or being drugged or being poisoned herself. And then I wrote, thought, taking me a while to get into the cadence of her writing. So that's Agatha Christie. That was at page 133. My camera is going to die any second. But it gets scarier and crazier. There's also a talk about a young girl that was with Andrew, Norma's father, first before he got married to Mary, which I find interesting. And I'm kind of thinking about a little bit to see maybe one of these girls might be that young girl. And yeah, because Norma's mother would not divorce Andrew. And so that played a huge part in a relationship with his other girlfriend. So there's that. So that's got motive. And then Norma ends up out of the blue, page 156, at the doctor's, at some doctor's. But he's not a doctor. You can tell. He's asking way too many personal questions. He knows who she is, even though she gave him a false name. And there's just all these assumptions about drugs and different things, and it's really, really strange. But it ends up being in a kidnap. So we don't know who kidnapped her. Okay, I am having to do a lot of work today, so I haven't really had a chance to read a lot. But I sat down to eat my lunch, and so then I started this book again, and I'm on page 236. And I'm thinking that it may be Francine. She is the second girl in the flats. Okay, there's a lot going on. I can't even remember where I left you guys off. I think my battery died, so I don't even know if I got into all my notes. Currently, right now, Poirot is going through what in his mind he can pull from all these different characters. He's saying it's too difficult. There's a lot going on, and there is. This story is very interesting because there's not been a murder necessarily. There was a girl that threw herself out the window, they say, but all in all, there's not really a murder that is there. So he's going through all the facts that he knows. He's trying to pinpoint things. He's trying to make sense of it all. And interesting fact came up about the foreign girl, Sonia, who is the secretary to Mr. Horsfield. And she was seen giving a book to a dignitary of some sort, secretly. She's got high suspicion, of course, and he's addressing her actually currently right at this very moment. But he's basically going through all these different facts about all the people that are involved. Francis really doesn't have a motive, which I find really interesting. I don't know if I told this in the previous video. I can't remember what I said or said and didn't say. But our main character, Norma, she's been kidnapped. There's obviously some drugging happening here. And there's some different stories playing into her story. But basically, she's just a very, very confused girl. She doesn't know up from down, but she has a lot of money. He convinced her that she was on these drugs or whatever was happening and that she needed to go into an insane asylum, basically, this house that you're free to come and go as you please. He made it sound very, very good, that it was her decision and stuff, but she is afraid because her mother, she was deemed an invalid and taken to a hospital, and she died early in her life, and it really caused a negative effect for Norma. But then she did choose to go. After they took her, the guy gets on the phone, fake doctor guy, gets on the phone and says, yeah, I have her. She's been kidnapped. It was successful. It does not identify who's on the other line. But there's something interesting about in the conversation, the person paused over a photograph. And so there's also a photo and there's these paintings of the family that's been brought up a few times. And one of the paintings have been moved, and that's of Mr. Restorick, Andrew Restorick. There's obviously a signification to that, and I'm thinking it has to do with the girl Lorraine, who was the first girl he was with when he left the woman that's Norma's mother. I think she knows something and she's hiding it. Because when she brought up Lorraine before, she started getting like a panic attack, like, I'm not saying anything, she doesn't want to get hurt. So she must know something. There's something happening that she knows is a secret. And I'm thinking it has to do with Frances because she's also a young girl. And the girl that Andrew left with was a young girl. And Mary was being poisoned. But I don't think they've met Frances. I don't think Andrew's met her. I don't think the uncles met her. So I think that'll play a huge part in the end. But that's what my thoughts are right now. I'm kind of leaning towards Frances as being the murderer of perhaps the mother. And this old lady that was in the apartment building might have seen something, heard something, and so Frances had to get rid of her and then framed also it on Norma. I think she's just framing everything on Norma to get rid of Norma. That's my guess so far. That's the only tie-in that I see. It is a lot of characters happening all over the place and little things happening that are pulling the story apart, becoming confusing. And I think that's why the writer, Agatha, is putting this piece in right now that we're going through, that he has to recall all these different events that happen to sort of piece it together, because honestly, there's a lot of different little rolling pieces that are happening all over the place that there's not even a murder yet. It's just all these different things. And we're into 237. So right now he's confronting Sonia and basically calling her out for being working with the embassy, and now she's freaking out about their stolen papers with Mr. Horsfield, and she's freaking out about that. So yeah, it's quite an interesting story. Now that I've gotten the whole groove of her writing, I'm starting to enjoy it a bit more, but it was definitely, that was a difficult challenge, and I think an audiobook would have been pretty amazing for this girl here. Audiobooks are amazing. I'm gonna continue reading a little bit more. Okay, so here's what's happening right now. I'm on page 288 and Poirot has done a couple more interviews and he is trying to narrow down the motive. and the intent. He interviewed Andrew Restorick, Mrs. Oliver, and a teacher who taught Norma back in school to see if she was insane. By her accounts, she was not insane. She was a normal kid. There was also a reflection back to the painting. There's got to be something with the painting. And I'm interested because, again, Frances Carey, she works at the gallery, who we found out in the last chapter that in the gallery there was a big issue with one of the paintings, supposedly said to be fake, and then it was sold anyways, but they're thinking it was a replica and that this gallery swindled these people out of a lot of money. Frances works there, and when Miss Oliver went and was following David Baker, he brought her to where he was staying. Frances was there, but also was the painter who works at the gallery. So all of these three are tied to the gallery, and this painting keeps coming up that Andrew has in his home that Poirot keeps noticing. Find that very interesting. So he's narrowed it down to money as being the prime motive. I still think it's Frances, but I think she's paired with someone else. I don't think she's doing this on her own. And I don't know how the family plays, but Mary is sneaking out of a lot of these things. She could very well also be part of this, or maybe the instigator. And Claudia might be as well, but I mean, that's the thing. I'm still sticking to Frances, but we'll see how this goes. I hope you're enjoying this so far. I am enjoying this a lot. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly say something. He's really looking into Andrew Restorick, and he again brings up that picture. So my theory, before I read any further, my theory is if it's not Frances Carey, or perhaps she's in cahoots with it, but it could be Andrew Restorick was away from his family for quite a long time. Now he must look similar to what he looked like before, but I think that's where this picture will play in. There was a left-handed, something about a left hand earlier, so I'm gonna keep that in my mind. Oh, that's what it is. The left hand was the person who shoved the lady who would have dated. Okay. I think I know what's going on. So Andrew Restorick, I don't think is Andrew Restorick. I don't think he is. And I think the picture is gonna prove it. What page am I on? 290. I think the picture's gonna prove it. I think that's how Poirot's going to say this, bring out the reason. And then I think he's going to prove it with the left hand, because there was a left-handed person open the window to push Laurel, or whatever her name is, out the window. Now the crazy thing is that girl, she dated Restorick, ran away with him originally when he left the family. And because she knew him, I think he had her killed, because then she would have testified that that is not the correct person. We'll see how that goes, but that is another theory that I'm thinking might be pretty valid. I mean, I'll have to call it eventually, but I still am not liking the fact that Frances, I don't know, there's something about her I don't really, I'm thinking she's a part of it somehow. Okay, so really funny how I said about Mary. Poirot says, his thoughts passed to Mary Restorick, and he considered her in turn. It struck him that what was really odd was that he had so few thoughts about her, because she really has been hid under the radar. Poirot is finding out the link between Louise, the girl who got thrown out the window. He's weaved his way to her now. Interesting. Mary has a wig, and I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how she plays into this, because she is in a bit of a disguise. Very interesting indeed. Okay. You guys, this is hilarious. Okay. So I had a feeling about this, but I wasn't 100% sure, and this is funny. Okay. So Poirot went for a little like catnap, and he said he knew all the bits were coming together, the disconnected bits and pieces all fitting in, a wig, a picture, 5 a.m., women in their hairdos, the peacock boy, all leading to the phrase with which it began, third girl. Then he gets a phone call. Dr. Stillingfleet insists on speaking to you at once, he says. It's urgent. Tell Dr. Stillingfleet he can... Dr. Stillingfleet, you say? He pushed past her, caught up the receiver. I'm here, Poirot speaking. Something has happened? She's walked out on me. He kidnapped the girl. Poirot did. Okay, so that's the latest. I just had to share that with you guys. I'm so shocked, but at the same time, I had a feeling about that. So funny. Okay, continuing on. When Frances Carey came home, they found David Baker dead in the apartment, and Norma was there holding the knife, admitting to it in a very odd way. Either Norma is the killer, and she's been since the very, very beginning. Obviously, it's not Frances. So I don't know who it is right now. But the only other person that had, unless David Baker was paid to be there, was killed beforehand, and Norma again was set up. I need to make a decision on who has done it. I'm going to go with Mary Restrict and Andrew Restrict. One of the two. I want to say Mary. I'm thinking she has something to do with this, because clearly Frances was the one who found David Baker. Unless she just pretended to be there beforehand. But I'm going to lean towards Mary, I think. Let's find out together. So Dr. Stillingfleet has just announced that his professional opinion is that Norma is sane. Another looking to see why Mary hasn't showed up yet. So Poirot is now starting to pipe up, which is what I've been waiting for. This is almost done. He goes, perhaps we have the wrong idea. I love how he flips things. Perhaps Madame is at least partly here already, in a matter of speaking. Oh my goodness. I have a theory that maybe Claudia is Mary. Interesting. Okay, that was a weird thought. So, we'll see. Because she does have the wig and stuff. And let's figure this out. Poirot leaned towards Mrs. Oliver. Mrs. Oliver stared. The parcel I entrusted to you. Oh, Mrs. Oliver dived into her shopping bag. She handed the black folder to him. He heard a sharply indrawn breath near him, but did not turn his head. He shook off the wrappings delicately and held up a wig of bouffant golden hair. Mrs. Restrict is not here, he said, but her wig is. Interesting. Where the devil did you get that, Poirot? Asked Neil. From the overnight bag of Miss Frances Carey, from which she had as yet no opportunity of removing it. Shall we see how it becomes her? I think I've guessed who it was. Mary, aka Frances Carey. With a single deft movement, he swept aside the black hair that masked Frances' face so effectively. Crowned with a golden array, let's say, before she could defend herself, she glared at him Oh my goodness, I totally did guess it. Not in the beginning, of course, but later I did. Wow, that's funny because I thought of her, when did I think of her? And I'm thinking that it may be Francine. I still think it's Frances, but I think she's paired with someone else. I don't think she's doing this on her own. Frances was twisting like an angry snake. Restrick jumped from his seat to come to her, but Neil's strong grip restrained him. No, we don't want any violence from you. The game's up, you know, Mr. Restrick. Or shall I call you Robert Orwell? Oh, I'm so right on both parts. Oh, okay. This is pretty interesting. I need to do this more often. Poirot had abandoned his trophy, the wig, had gone to Norma and taken her hand gently in his. Your ordeal is... Oh, makes my heart break. Your ordeal is over, my child. The victim will not be sacrificed. You are neither mad, nor have you killed anyone. She definitely was the scapegoat. Classic scapegoat. Oh, breaks my heart. With cunningly administered drugs, with lies, doing their best to drive you either to suicide or to belief in your own guilt and madness. So poor Miss Oliver totally thought she was guilty in the beginning. She was a great help to this case. So excited to have solved it. All right, before I end this, I will say goodbye because my battery is going to die. I'm just looking at it now. And I will do a wrap up at the very end tomorrow if I can. That was so fun. I think I'm gonna do this again. It was such a great idea. Okay, you guys, this is the wrap up for this book. So good. So good. I don't know where I left you guys off, really. I think my battery was gonna die again. I'd never really filmed that much content in a large sitting. So I'm gonna be editing a lot of it. And I couldn't believe that I actually solved it. I knew it pretty early on. I started suspecting the murderer in this one. The last bit that you guys probably didn't get was just the end of where Poirot was saying all of the reasons why he felt like the person did it and the clues. And as I was reading them, a lot of them were exactly what I thought as well. The conclusion of this video, I really enjoyed it. If you enjoyed watching it, please leave me a yes in the comments below so that I will do these more often. I don't think I would do them every month, but at least every other month. That might be something fun and interesting. As an author, this was super fun to try to figure out and solve. It's something I like to do anyways when I'm watching movies. I'm always constantly hyper aware of plot, foreshadowing, small little details that people would normally pass. And if you read this book and you solved it, let me know. Maybe this was just like a really easy book. But I would really love for your comments in the comments below. And yeah, check out March Mystery Madness, where I incorporated this book into the Double Double challenge this month. You can watch the next video and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Bye.